You start the car, everything sounds normal, it pulls away from the curb like it always does, and then you see it. That little amber engine icon. Your stomach drops, because the car feels fine, but your brain immediately jumps to the worst case scenario, expensive repairs, being stranded, or damaging the engine by driving just a little more. If you're here because you typed, check engine light on in Toyota Corolla Cross, you're probably looking for one thing, a clear path to figure out how serious this is, what you can safely check yourself, and what information you need before you call a shop or a dealer. And the tricky part is this, the check engine light is not a single warning. It's a whole language. Sometimes it's basically saying, hey, something emissions related is slightly off, schedule a visit when you can. Other times it's saying, stop. Now. You're actively damaging something expensive. So let's translate it into decisions you can make in real life, in your driveway, in a parking lot, or on the shoulder of the road, without guessing and without throwing parts at the car. First, the most important detail isn't the code. It's the behavior of the light. If the check engine light is flashing, treat that as urgent. A flashing light commonly points to an active misfire severe enough that raw fuel can be sent into the catalytic converter. That converter is designed to clean up exhaust, not to act like a furnace for unburned fuel. Keep driving with a flashing light and you can turn a relatively straightforward fix into a much bigger bill. If it's flashing and you feel shaking, stumbling, a sudden loss of power, or you smell fuel, the safest move is to ease off, avoid hard acceleration, and get to a safe place to stop. If it continues flashing at idle, or the car is running rough, you're in tow or immediate service territory. If the light is steady, you have more room to think. Not ignore it forever, but you can usually do a quick triage. Here's what matters right away, does the car feel different? Not in a vague way, but in specific ways you can notice in 10 seconds. Does it hesitate when you press the gas? Does it idle rough, like it's vibrating more than usual? Do you hear popping from the exhaust, or a loud ticking that wasn't there? Any strong fuel smell? Any temperature warning, steam, or signs of overheating? If any of those show up, even with a steady light, you should treat it as more urgent and avoid long drives until you know what's going on. Now, there's a reason this gets confusing in a Toyota Corolla Cross. Modern Toyotas are good at keeping the car drivable even when something is wrong. The computer can compensate for a sensor drifting out of range, or for a small air leak, or for a component that's starting to fail. So you can have a car that feels normal while the engine computer is quietly saying, I'm at the edge of what I can correct. That's why it drives fine doesn't automatically mean it's fine. Okay. Before you scan anything, there are a few owner-level checks that are worth doing because they're fast, safe, and they genuinely solve a chunk of cases. Start with the simplest, think back to the last time you fueled up. Did the light come on shortly after? Did you stop the pump early, top off, or click the nozzle a bunch of times? Did you leave the car running while fueling? Any of those can contribute to EVAP system complaints. The EVAP system is the sealed system that captures fuel vapors and routes them to be burned instead of venting to the air. It's sensitive, and it's one of the most common reasons for a steady check engine light with no obvious drivability symptoms. Now check the fuel cap. Even though some newer setups make this less of a magic fix than it used to be, it still matters. Make sure it's the correct cap, it's seated properly, and the seal isn't cracked or flattened. Tighten it until it clicks, and don't assume one click is enough if it wasn't seated straight. If you have an aftermarket cap, that alone can cause EVAP leak codes because the sealing surface or pressure relief behavior isn't exactly what the system expects. But here's the catch, even if you find the cap loose, don't stop there mentally. A loose cap is a possible cause, not a diagnosis. The smart move is to tighten it and then still plan to read the code, because the same light could be triggered by something else entirely, and you don't want to spend a week hoping it goes away while a different problem grows. Next quick check, battery and voltage clues. If your Corolla Cross recently had a weak battery, a jump start, or the battery was disconnected, you can get odd behavior and stored codes. Low voltage can make sensors report nonsense for a moment, and it can also reset readiness monitors. That doesn't mean you should ignore the light, but it does change how you interpret it. If the car cranks slowly, the lights dim, or you've had electrical weirdness, put battery/charging health on your mental list. Then do a quick underhood look for anything obviously out of place. You're not disassembling anything. You're looking for the kind of mistake that happens after routine maintenance. Was the air filter box opened recently? Is the intake duct seated properly and clamped? Is there a hose that looks disconnected or cracked? A loose intake connection after the mass airflow sensor can cause unmetered air, which can trigger lean condition codes and rough idle. Sometimes it's as simple as a clamp that wasn't tightened after an air filter change. Also think about recent work. Oil change, air filter, spark plugs, any aftermarket accessories, even a detail shop that might have sprayed water where it shouldn't go. The check engine light often shows up right after something was touched, and that timing is a clue. Now, if the light is steady and the car feels normal, you might be tempted to just keep driving and see what happens. The problem is that you're driving blind. The same steady light could be a minor EVAP leak, or it could be a thermostat issue that keeps the engine from reaching proper temperature, or it could be the early stage of a misfire that only shows up under load. Those are very different outcomes. The only way to stop guessing is to read the codes. This is where people get burned by internet advice. They search a code, see one sentence like, replace oxygen sensor, and then they buy a part. But a code is not a parts list. A code is the computer saying, I saw a condition I didn't like. The root cause might be upstream. So let's talk about scanning in a way that actually helps. You have two practical options. One is a parts store scan, where they read the code for you. The other is a simple OBD2 scanner or a Bluetooth dongle with an app. The advantage of having your own scanner isn't just convenience. It's that you can capture information that matters, whether the code is pending or confirmed, and the freeze frame data. Freeze frame is basically a snapshot of what the engine computer saw at the moment it decided the problem was real enough to set the light. Engine temperature, RPM, load, speed, fuel trim. That snapshot can tell you whether the issue happened on a cold start, at highway speed, at idle, under acceleration. Without it, you're guessing. So if you're dealing with check engine light on in Toyota Corolla Cross and you're about to clear codes, don't. Not yet. Read them, write them down, and if your tool allows it, save the freeze frame. Clearing codes too early is one of the biggest self-inflicted problems because it erases the evidence that makes diagnosis faster and cheaper. Now let's translate the most common code families into what they usually mean in real life, and what your next move should be. Not a repair tutorial, but a decision path. One big bucket is EVAP small leak codes, often in the P0442 or P0456 neighborhood. These frequently show up with no drivability symptoms. The car runs fine. Fuel economy might be unchanged. The light is steady. In many cases, it's a sealing issue, gas cap, filler neck, a small crack in a hose, or a purge-related issue. The key point is urgency. EVAP issues are usually not, stop driving now, problems. They're schedule service problems because they can cause you to fail an emissions test where applicable, and they can be annoying and persistent. If you tighten the cap and the code comes back after a few drive cycles, you're likely looking at a leak that needs smoke testing or purge/vent valve diagnosis. That's a shop-level test, and it's worth doing properly rather than swapping random valves. Another bucket is misfire codes, typically P0300 for random misfire, or P0301 through P0304 for a specific cylinder. This is where you pay attention even if the light is steady, because misfires can range from mild to destructive. If you feel the engine shaking, if acceleration is weak, or if the light ever flashes, don't keep driving it hard. Misfires can be caused by spark plugs, ignition coils, fuel injector issues, vacuum leaks, or even low fuel pressure. And here's the nuance, a misfire code doesn't automatically mean replace the coil on that cylinder. Sometimes the coil is fine and the real issue is a plug that's worn, oil in the plug well, a connector not seated, or a fueling problem. If your Corolla Cross is still under warranty, this is often a document the code and schedule service soon situation, especially if it repeats. Then there are oxygen sensor and air fuel sensor related codes, and fuel trim codes like System 2 Lean or System 2 Rich. People love to jump straight to bare O2 sensor. But oxygen sensors are messengers. They report what's in the exhaust. If the engine is running lean because of unmetered air, the sensor will report lean. If there's an exhaust leak upstream, it can pull in oxygen and make the sensor report lean. If there's a misfire, oxygen content changes and the sensor reports something that looks like a mixture problem. So the smarter interpretation is, these codes tell you what the engine is experiencing, not necessarily which part to replace. This is where fuel trims become useful in plain English. Fuel trim is the computer adding or subtracting fuel to heat the target mixture. If trims are strongly positive, the computer is adding fuel because it thinks the engine is running lean. That often points to extra air getting in, like a vacuum leak or intake leak, or sometimes low fuel delivery. If trims are strongly negative, it's pulling fuel because it thinks it's rich, which can happen with leaking injectors, a stuck purge valve feeding vapors, or a sensor bias. You don't need to be a technician to use this. You just need to know that trims tell you direction. They help you avoid the replace the sensor because the sensor complained trap. Another common and expensive sounding code family is catalytic converter efficiency, often P0420. This one scares people because they've heard catalytic converter is bad. Sometimes it is. But very often, P0420 is the end of a story that started earlier. A long-term misfire, an engine running rich, oil consumption, coolant issues, or even an exhaust leak can make the catalyst look inefficient. If you get a P0420, the first question is, do you also have misfire codes, fuel trim codes, or oxygen sensor codes? If yes, you fix those first. Replacing a catalytic converter without addressing the cause is how people end up replacing it twice. There's also the thermostat and coolant temperature bucket, commonly P0128. This can show up when the engine isn't reaching the expected operating temperature within a certain time. In real life, that can be a thermostat stuck open, a coolant temperature sensor issue, or sometimes conditions like very cold weather combined with short trips. The reason it matters isn't that the car will immediately break down. It's that running too cool can hurt fuel economy, increase emissions, and keep the engine in a less efficient mode. It's usually not a pull over now code, but it's not one to ignore for months either. Then you have airflow and pressure sensor related codes, like MAF or MAP performance issues. These can be caused by intake leaks, contamination, wiring issues, or sometimes a sensor that's drifting. Again, the symptom matters. If the car is stalling, surging, or has major hesitation, treat it as urgent enough to avoid highway merges and heavy traffic until it's diagnosed. If it's just a steady light with mild symptoms, you can often drive gently to a shop. And one more that's worth calling out because it can mimic other problems, purge valve issues. A purge valve that sticks open can cause rough idle after fueling, hard starts, or rich/lean codes depending on conditions. People often misdiagnose this as a fuel quality issue or a random sensor problem. If your light came on after filling up and the car stumbled or struggled to start right after, keep purge behavior in mind. Now, once you have codes, the next decision is what to do with the car today. Not how to fix it, but what's the safest next step. If the light is flashing, or the engine is running rough, or you have a strong fuel smell, or the temperature is rising, your next step is not to clear codes and hope. Your next step is to stop driving it hard, avoid long distances, and get it evaluated immediately. If it's severe, tow it. The cost of a tow can be less than the cost of turning a misfire into a catalytic converter failure. If the light is steady and the car drives normally, and your codes point to EVAP small leak or a non-critical emissions issue, you can usually keep driving for normal errands while you schedule service. But you still want to be intentional. Monitor for changes. If the car starts to run rough, if the light begins flashing, or if new symptoms appear, your urgency level changes. If you're thinking, should I clear the code to see if it comes back, you can, but only after you've recorded everything. Codes, freeze frame, and whether they were pending codes. Clearing without recording is like deleting the only photo of the suspect and then trying to describe them from memory. Also understand what pending means. A pending code is the computer saying, I saw something once, I'm watching it. A confirmed code is, I saw it enough times to be sure. If you only have a pending code and no symptoms, that can be a sign of an intermittent issue. It doesn't mean it's imaginary. It means it might take the right conditions to repeat, which is exactly why freeze frame and notes about when it happened are valuable. Now let's talk about the dealer versus an independent shop, because this is where Corolla Cross owners often hesitate. If the car is under warranty, or if you have multiple codes that suggest a deeper system issue, the dealer can make sense because they'll have brand-specific diagnostic procedures and access to technical service information. But for many common check engine light causes, a competent independent shop with proper diagnostic equipment can handle it just as well. The deciding factor isn't the logo on the building. It's whether they diagnose or guess. You want a shop that will read data, confirm the fault, and explain why they're replacing a part, not one that sells you the most common component associated with the code. When you call a shop, the best thing you can do is sound like someone who has useful information, not someone who's panicking. Tell them whether the light is steady or flashing, whether the car is drivable, what symptoms you feel, and the exact codes. If you have freeze frame, mention the conditions: cold start, highway cruise, after fueling, under acceleration. That can save you diagnostic time. And here's a subtle but important point: if your Corolla Cross seems fine and you're tempted to ignore the light because you're busy, remember that the car's computer is designed to catch problems early, before they become obvious. The whole point is to warn you while it's still just a light. Waiting until it runs badly often means the problem has progressed, and the diagnosis can actually get harder because multiple systems start reacting to the original fault. So what's the real answer to the question that keeps people stuck: why can a check engine light be serious even when the car drives fine? Because the engine computer can hide symptoms by compensating, and because some failures do damage quietly. A misfire can be intermittent. A mixture problem can be corrected until it can't. A catalyst can be overheated without you feeling it in the seat. The light is often the first and only honest clue you get. If you take one practical approach from all of this, make it this: treat the check engine light like a message you need to decode, not a verdict. First, judge urgency by flashing versus steady and by symptoms. Second, do the quick, safe checks like the fuel cap and obvious intake issues. Third, scan and record codes and freeze frame before clearing anything. And fourth, decide your next step based on the code family and how the car behaves, not on a generic one-line description from a search result. And if you're still sitting there thinking, okay, but what do I do right now, in the next hour? Here's the simplest way to act without overreacting. If it's flashing or running rough, stop and arrange service. If it's steady and drives normally, scan it as soon as you can, drive gently, and schedule service based on what you find. That's how you handle check engine light on in Toyota Corolla Cross, like a calm adult instead of like someone gambling with an expensive machine. Because the goal isn't to be fearless. The goal is to stop guessing. Once you have the codes and the context, the light stops being scary. It becomes information. And information is what keeps a small problem small.